There we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. Today's guest is a game designer, game developer from Germany named Martin Nerurkar. You have been making games since the early 2000s. You've done a lot of different things. I see a lot of interface design. I see some tabletop developments. You have a lot of projects under your belt, and you've been in the indie space for a very long time. So welcome to the show. And I mean, please, is this an apt description of yourself? If there's anything I've left out.
No, I feel that hits it. I sort of like when people ask me how long I've been making games, the answer is like forever. Because
Mm-hmm.
even before the 2000s, when I was doing like modding, I was doing like shitty board games as a 6 year old.
Mm-hmm.
I still have them in a box somewhere. They're all really terrible, but I don't know. I was always sort of tinkering with games.
Right. I think that's a common thread for people who have made game development a lifelong sort of career. Uh, Typically, it's a bug that hits early, and then you can't quite escape it. Do you really remember like what your first foray into not just appreciating games, but starting to be like, I think I'm going to make something?
Oh man, I don't know. I was mostly making really bad board games that were just roll a dice, move along a board, kind of like Monopoly,
Mm-hmm.
but with different cards and different scribbles on them. And I very much remember my parents bought a computer pretty early on. Like we had a Commodore C64. And I remember because I was into fantasy and fantasy games and role playing games as like a 6 year old. And I remember trying to do like a sort of first person kill a dragon kind of game. What I wanted to make, like I remember the sketch of like there's a sword at the bottom and there's a dragon up top, and sort of have to stab this. It never materialized. I never was even remotely good enough at coding to get it to work.
Right.
But that's sort of the early memories I have.
Right. And so it sounds to me then, and based off of your portfolio, that tabletop gaming has kind of been a throughput from childhood to now.
Yes and no, in the sense that sort of tabletop gaming was my first big love in sort of gaming, and it's something I've kept at for like I don't know. I started at like 10 years old or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been always sort of playing and GMing a lot, but I've always sort of done like add-on stuff or like my own homebrew or like character sheets or whatever just for fun. Um, but I've never really done anything commercially in the space, like actually sat down and made like physical games until last year actually.
Right. And that's the Novo and Ex Umbra projects. Uh,
Yeah, and that's Ex Umbra, Ex Umbra playing on. I made a bunch of smaller ones. They're not on the company website. Um, I made like five or so small games last year.
Tabletop.
Yeah, all sort of tabletop print and play physical kind of games.
So the Ex Novo and Ex Umbra, what do we call these? I mean, I guess would you call them modules? And not they're not no they're not modules. It's
No,
a
I call them map drawing games.
map drawing games, right? I looked at it and I was like, at first I thought it was like a tool set, but it's got play element to it. Can you give a good description? I guess we'll start with Ex Novo because it's the one that fascinated me as like
Uh,
a tabletop tool first and foremost.
yeah, I mean, both Ex Novo and Ex Umbra sort of came from the same core idea, and that is, so Ex Novo. It's hard to explain a project.
Yeah.
I don't know. Ex Novo started as a fun project between me and Konstantinos, a friend of mine, and we both have an architecture background. Like we both started, we're both in the game space. We're both like role playing games. We wanted to make a project together. We sort of rammed our heads together until we had a fun idea. And the idea was, let's make a game that creates a city that you can play as your GM prep. So if you want to, if you're a role-playing campaign and you need a city, you can just play the game, and it'll put out a city that's fun to play in as like a role-playing campaign. And that's sort of where Ex Novo came from. And it's sort of between a tool and a game. Like it has rules and you can play it. It has a beginning and an end. But it's very malleable. You can change things and do whatever you want in between and sort of ignore whatever happens and do your own thing because there's no winning condition. You know, in that sense, it's more like a storytelling game if you play it with others. But it turned out really well. Like we were really happy with the result and sort of the cities it outputs. Like in a sense, it's a procedural generation rule set that requires a person to execute it.
Right. Right. So because there's choices to be made through the process. It is kind of interesting to create, like, a lot of people avoid being a GM for role-playing games because the prep work sucks. Like, I mean, if you're into crafting a campaign and you've got, you know, that creative and tactile desire to create cities and environments and encounters and all that, then that's fun, and that's why you end up being a GM. But for a lot of, like, for a majority of tabletop players, that process is not very fun. Do you think, like, this is the first sort of tabletop product I've seen that approaches a solution to that sort of problem by providing a more fun way of prepping? Are there other examples of this sort of tool/game on the market, or is this an emerging thing that you think has some future potential?
So there's a bunch of other sort of games in the space, but it's not like just a ton. Like it's just relatively narrow, and most of the things I saw sort of concentrating on actually designing spaces like cities or countries or something like that, because that's something that is easy to map out, you know, literally. I don't know. I think it's a fun space to be in. Like we made Ex Novo, and then I sort of like, hey, if we can do towns, why can't we do dungeons? And I made Ex Umbra, which sort of has some different design choices in it, but it's sort of like a similar core. And we Konstantinos and I are sort of tinkering with a third iteration of the idea. But it's tricky because, like, is there a market for that? Like, you know, I don't know. Like we've had surprising success with both games, in the sense of that somebody had a big YouTube video and then it's been selling. But it's I don't know. I'm still really enthusiastic about the role playing game development space, but I don't know. I feel like an outsider dabbling, you know.
Right. I think it can feel. I mean, at least for me, despite having, you know, talking about my first game design experience was I was too broke as a kid to afford the Dungeons and Dragons rule books, so I just made up a bunch of rules with the 6-siders that we had, right? And we played that. And so tabletop has always kind of been a thing that I've been drawn into, but I still feel very outsider to that industry, right? Despite actively playing every other week, and you know, I have a billion Magic cards, and I have every, you know, edition of the rule books. I feel very much a consumer of the industry, and not a player in it. Or, well, I guess I am a player, but not an active developer in the industry. So with this, like, toe dip you've done, what have you noticed in terms of difference between the indie games marketplace, so to speak, and selling tabletop products?
So I've only done digital stuff so far, and I've mostly sold on itch, which is, so far everything's the same except you're selling a PDF instead of like an executable, which was like there's Drive-Thru RPG as sort of like the big sort of PDF selling side, but I'm making more sales on itch by a large margin, which is still surprising to me. So I think if you just sell sort of digital copies, there's actually not that much of a difference. Obviously there's sort of different skills because layouting a book is a different thing than, making a menu, even though they're both sort of interface jobs. But I don't know, it feels kind of similar. But as soon as you get into like actually making physical products, which is something I've sort of dancing around, which I kind of want to do, but also kind of don't want to do because what's your print run size? Who's gonna be your printer? Where do you warehouse this thing? How do you deliver it? Suddenly there's shipping and tax because you ship from the States to Europe or the other way around. And that's sort of a whole sort of big, new, different thing that you generally don't have in the interface because we don't do physical.
Right. Yeah, there's a very interesting seesaw at play, right, where indie games, there's an extensive amount of cost getting up to release, but once you're at release, it's basically costs nothing to ship. I mean, whatever you want to spend on marketing, you can spend, or you can spend nothing. It's no big deal. Putting it on Steam, putting it on itch, whatever, it's not going to really cost you anything. But there's that big investment that comes beforehand to actually get the product versus tabletop. Apart from the designer's time and maybe artist, the cost of development is very, very low. You don't need hardware and 20 people to make a product, and it can be a very, very low cost but then you get to that final mile and suddenly the cost is through the roof. And so I think that's part of the reason we've seen the Kickstarter model be so successful for these kinds of games. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about which side of the seesaw is it better to be on?
So I think Kickstarter is really good for physical products because it gives you a solid number for your print run. Like the print run size makes a massive difference in how much you pay per product or per book. But it's super tough to gauge because you don't want 20 boxes of books, rotting in your basement or wherever. And Kickstarter pre-sales, which is just Kickstarter, is a really good way to sort of, all right, I know I'll get this many. So I have already sold this many, and then I'll put some on top to sell later. But that's a sort of really, really, I think, good way for indies to do print stuff. But then again, it's running a Kickstarter. Oh, that's its own 2 months full-time job.
Right.
Which is also something I'm considering because I have more RPG projects in the works, and I'm like, maybe I need to do a Kickstarter. My current plan is to make like a shitty little game, like hopefully a fun little game, but like a trashy little, 12, 20-page bean kind of game, and then run a Kickstarter for that. And have like a maximum number of physical products. Like say, I'm only gonna sell 100, and then print them myself, stable them together, and then fulfill them myself. Actually, ship them to people myself. But do this as like a prototype of like a Kickstarter and like a physical product thing in one, and then maybe decide if I ever want to do actual, get a print run of something done. Because I don't know. That's like part of the business I don't like. Same with like marketing your game. I just want to make the game. Somebody else, please help me sell it.
Right. It's something that we've done a lot of our own manufacture and fulfillment for merch primarily, but like that's a whole side hustle if you want to actually get good at it. Yeah. And even having done it for 5-7 years, we're still bad at it, and there's all kinds of inefficiencies that I guess partnerships and that kind of thing can develop. But the sense of ownership and I guess if you're going for that zine model, the ease of approach is very appealing for a first attempt.
My motto in a lot of things is prototype it, and that'd be my prototype.
Right. It's I see a lot of interface design work in your portfolio. Does that prototype it model still apply there? Because I do definitely want to talk about interface design because it's a field that I know very little about. But do you do a lot of rapid prototyping with interface? It always seems like something that's more like intentional to me.
It sort of depends. Like the prototype I do for interfaces is usually sketches.
Okay, that
You
makes
know,
sense.
that's the version I have before it goes somewhere else. Is me sketching it out and trying sort of figuring out where the things should go. And like interface design to me is a lot about hierarchy in the sense of if things are grouped right, sort of staggered in a good way, then it's easier for me to understand
Hmm.
and it's easy for me to use. You know, and that's something that needs a sketch often.
Right. So I see a lot of the interface design you've done are for different projects. Now, I don't know. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption here is that you come onto the project at a certain
Yeah.
stage, right? So I'm curious about your onboarding process when you're doing an interface job, to gather the right information to get the right assessment of what that hierarchy needs to be like and what the interface needs to communicate and all that stuff. So especially when
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
working with different designers.
yeah. It sort of starts with trying to get a feeling for the game and what the game is about, because whatever is important to the game should be important to the interface. Um, and then it sort of depends how much freedom I have in the job. Sometimes it's like the interface is done, we just want it pretty and cleaned up. Please just take care of that. Then there's not a lot of sort of work on my end. But if we're going sort of from scratch kind of view, um, I'm trying to figure out what the information is and what the actions are in the sort of different screens or the different interface environments. And then use that as sort of a baseline to see what has to be where and how they sort of group together, if that makes sense.
Right, right, right. So I mean, I assume that's just a lot of playing the game. But uh, do you ever find that like your interface design can start to do you find that interface design can lean how a game is played in different directions? Even potentially as strong as core mechanics design.
It sort of depends how much room the interface has within the game. Um, I think there's clearly cases where the game is very interface heavy, and then the interface has a lot of leverage over how the game's played. Um, but I don't think it should ever sort of, conflict with the core mechanics in any way.
Right.
Um, what the interface is there for is to enable the player to the player wants to do something in the game, and the interface should make it possible for them to know what they have to do that. If that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
if they want to, go somewhere, then the buttons to move should be intuitive and useful and whatever, and there needs to be a highlight to tell them where they want to go if that's the thing the game has to do and that kind of thing. Um, and in that sense, there's there's a lot of stuff you can sort of, I mean, that gets us back to hierarchy. What's important? Like, what are we sort of showing in the UI? What are we sort of emphasizing? Which sort of tells the player what kind of actions they can take. And we can hide actions, or we can sort of, deprioritize them or whatever. And sort of, you know, if we have like a classic Skyrim like RPG and we have a quest mark for the main quest that blinks all the time, you know, people will probably be annoyed, but also probably, I'm not saying do that because it's probably going to be fucking annoying. But you know what I mean? That'll pull the players towards completion. It's like the I mean, if your if your email app has a red icon on it, you'll click on it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, right, right. Unless you've become numb to it.
Yeah.
After inbox has exploded too much. Um, do you feel that it is possible for interface design to fix problems in a game? Design problems.
Hmm. Now I want to ask what a design problem is.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, that can range from all sorts of the game's
Yeah.
unbalanced to, I mean, in terms of uh, giving the player suggestion and stuff. Obviously, I assume interface has a strong capacity there. Um, but you know, elements of game design that are harder to communicate or complex to communicate, um, can good interface
Oh,
fix
absolutely.
those things?
Absolutely. Like it cannot fix problems in the gameplay, but it can make and it should make complex relationships transparent.
Right.
You know,
And how does you do that without having an equally complex interface? Is my question.
um, that this is a very sort of specific question based on what the game is doing. But
Yes.
a thing an interface can do is it can change. You know, you can animate things, you can hide things or highlight things. You can um, use recurring colors to link concepts that are, or like icons that are in different places. You can link them conceptually by reoccurring. There's always a triangle when it's about fighting, and even though there's fighting in like 15 menus, whenever it's like the red triangle, all right, this has to do with fighting strength, whatever, and that helps you
Mhm.
sort of pull it together.
That's interesting. And I assume a lot of these symbols are things that, as human beings who've had X amount of media exposure, we tend to sort of homogenize in our minds the ideas of what these things represent. Like
Yeah, I mean, a
a
lot of
red is aggressive, triangle is usually dangerous of some sort. Um, how
a
much
lot
do
of
you rely on
interface
the?
is a lot of interface is sort of working with the vocabulary that's already there. Because if I do that, I don't have to teach you anything. If I add a crazy new icon that you don't know because it's five swirls in a triangle formation, you don't know what that means, um, and I'll have to teach you as part of the game or part of the interface or part of the tutorial or whatever. If I use two crossed swords, it's probably stands for fight or strength or battle or anything of that sort.
Mhm.
Um, and it's I think if the interface wants to be transparent, it's pretty useful to do a lot of that. Like enemies red, friends are blue. Hmm. It's obviously then we have issues like color blindness and
Right.
accounting for that, but um, that's very sort of intuitively understood. And the less sort of work the player has to do, the better I think the interface often is.
So then I'm curious because again you have like the games that you've worked on. I mean, I'm seeing a wide range of art styles in them, right?
Hmm.
So if we are as interface designers relying on the sort of common conceptions of things, um, how do we prevent games from sort of looking or feeling the same if we're reusing a lot of the same symbology, the same color tropes, and so on to get the messages across?
I think there's a like it's like saying writing A is gonna always look the same, and we have 500,000 different fonts that make the A look different. You know what I mean?
Okay,
It's
yeah,
the same here. If you use a language of icons, for example, like crosswords, there's an infinite way of versions you can have of these crosswords.
mm-hmm.
You just have to have the one that's consistent to your world and sort of make sense, um, and then have that throughout your UI language. It'll still be recognizable because we can see the pattern, but it wouldn't look like the same asset all the time.
Right,
Like
right,
we're like you see the emergency exit icon. It even if everybody uses the same, it doesn't matter because we're sort of understanding what it does is more important
right,
than sort of having it be unique and hard to read.
right, right. I want to meet the designer who's like, nah, I think I want to really let's go for blue exit sign. I think that'll be
Yeah.
good. Um, that's that's so but then okay, so when you are deciding the font of these assets, I mean to go into so many different projects that have such unique art styles, as an interface designer, how do you syncopate with the aesthetic that's already established by the time you join the project? Or do you like it's interface design is one of those things that I think needs to adapt, or interface designers need to adapt quite readily, Whereas, people tend to hire a character artist or an environment artist because they've already got this, style locked in.
Yeah.
So how do you adapt?
So in most of the, I think in most of the jobs I've done, sort of UI work for, the art style was already set. Like you usually come in on like in the latter half of the project where a lot of things are already nailed down. And as you say, you just kind of have to adapt. Um, and it's hard to say, like it's a creative process. There's assets already there that you sort of have to work with. Maybe there's already like a temporary UI in place, and your job is less to sort of redo everything and more like to reorganize the things. Like sometimes it's less of a visual job and more of a structural job. Like there's two sort of components to it.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly I don't know if there's like a rule set or like a good guidance. You look at what's there and you try to come up with something that works. And I like the more complex the screens are, the simpler the interface should be. You don't want lots of bells and whistles taking up space if you have like lots of little like 4x kind of little fiddle buttons and like scales and stuff. Then you don't want every slider to be like fancy embossed metal kind of.
Right.
So it's a mixture of sort of the sensibilities of the designer you're working with and your own design sensibilities, and then the complexity of the interface and the art style that's already in place, and sort of you fiddle around and you have something. I don't know.
Right. So it sounds like it's almost innate, which makes me curious if there's anything that you think in your life or your play history has given you a strong sense of adaptability.
You're asking very difficult questions.
Good.
I don't know. I'm sort of like, I think as a game designer, adaptability is sort of really important.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you work in a team and not as like a solo indie, you're always sort of in between everybody else. You have like a coding department, you have like an art department, and you need to sort of talk to everybody and sort of get their stuff, what they have, what they want, and pull it together to make a whole. And that's, I don't know, that sort of requires you to be creative and compromising, and so not compromising is the wrong word, but able to compromise. Mm-hmm. I guess is that better? English is hard.
It's pretty good.
And I don't know, like it's tricky to say. I think it's sort of like just spending a lot of time doing visual things and
mucking about.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say how your creative process works.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand. I understand completely. Do you feel that? See now, when I think of tabletop products, right, my mind immediately summons a like wall of text page with like maybe a little illustration in the corner. So I'm curious if there's any interface design tricks or aspects of your past that have sort of made its way into your tabletop products, or is there any way that tabletop products could have better interface design even though they're largely just paragraphs of text?
I think there's like layout is its own sort of beast. Mm-hmm. And I still feel like a newbie there. Like I've been doing it for a year, and like everybody's been doing it for longer, and they make such beautiful products, and my shit always feels very basic. But I think sort of the structural thoughts, when as they pertain to interfaces and as they pertain to like books, are sort of similar in the sense that in which order do you explain things? The concepts that are related should be sort of close together in the book. Also, I think a big part, both in interface design and in book design, which is often not a luxury you're not given, is white space. Right. Don't try and cram every sort of square inch of your screen with information or of your page. Just leave some air. And sort of highlight what's important, maybe a picture can do that at the right place. Maybe it's just bold, or it's like a sidebar, or like a different colored font, or whatever you're doing. But a big part is sort of also the question is, how is the book used? You know, a game is used and you play and you click, but the book is read once, maybe, but then it's also used as a reference document.
Yes.
You know, which means you also sort of need to surface sort of things. Stuff I've seen is like a line on the edge of the page that has a different color based on the section you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So you quickly know, oh, I need to get to the equipment section that's green or whatever, and you can just flip until you have the green sidebar,
Right.
and stuff like that. It's like interesting sort of ways of bringing the accessibility of sort of interface design into books.
It is something that I think RPG products could absolutely do better with, because like I found myself playing some tabletop games and like God, flipping through to find the spell is like the most annoying thing. It slows down the game so much so that we started writing page numbers next to the spells just so that we'd have the quick reference every time. And even then it's still a hassle because the book is this thick and so are there any things that you think or that you wish the industry at large would adopt more readily to make that process less painful for players and God help GMs?
I mean, if you look at D&D, they're doing a lot of sort of, especially now with COVID and like all the online play, they're doing a lot of work to try and sort of minimize that. Like there's D&D Beyond, and like I think there's like products where you can get like magic spells as cards, so you have the deck of your magic spells, so you don't have to look up every time. But to a certain degree, it's just a function of the complexity of the game. D&D as an RPGs can be overwhelmingly complex. Like every class has its own sort of set of rules, and then there's spellcasters with their sets of spells, and how many spell slots do I have remaining, and all that kind of thing. And I don't think that's solvable without going sort of outside in the sense of I have an app that manages that, or like I use the search function in my PDF version of the rulebook to look up my spells. Because the games are just so complicated, and I don't know. It's tough to sort of get around that,
Right. It's like imagine coming into an interface design project on an MMO that's existed for 20 years already and having to start them from scratch is a very tough challenge to get all that information across. I guess.
I mean, even MMOs like have a lot of information that's not contained within the game. You know what I mean? There's like wikis and forums where you need to get your information to figure out the stuff, because the game has become so complex that containing it all within the game doesn't work. And then there's mods for the UI, so you can surface the specific parts you need, but somebody else needs different parts. And you know what I mean? It's just I think at a sort of sufficient level of complexity, it's always going to be, especially when you're doing things manually, like in a role-playing game, it's always going to be it's going to be a little bit of a mess.
I think Minecraft is my favorite example of a game that got way too complex really fast. Like to do everything in it, I was explaining because we had a big run, our community, we had a big run through and did everything, and at some point people were asking like, if we didn't have a wiki, how would we have ever known to do this? And I mean that's something that I think as an interface designer, like you would have done, implemented something to lead or explain things in there, but there is also some magic in unexplained elements of a game, and I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, Minecraft is very much about exploration,
right?
Overall, so it's okay that there's no list of crafting recipes, so you just have to start crafting and see what happens. Take that how far you want to take it, and then go to a wiki when you don't want to deal with it anymore.
Right. Do you think that it's inevitable then that like games? I guess it is possible to have a game that grows in complexity obviously has a player base with it. A game that starts complex, well, that's a wholly different, hey, I made this RTS on my own and it's, got 30,000 different unit types and nobody's played it because nobody can understand it. That's a different scenario. But a game that grows in complexity, like D&D has, like Minecraft did, like World of Warcraft did. Do you think that it always grows in step with the player base, and thus the wikis and the mods and the stuff will sort of inevitably come, or is that something that developers need to be mindful of?
I think it's sort of part of the life model. Like if we're talking MMOs, they need to evolve and add new content, otherwise people will stop playing.
Right.
So it'll always sort of grow in complexity. It can't grow infinitely because you'll need to sort of, still piece of software that needs to run on a computer. So there's a limit to whatever space you'll take up on the hard drive, or I don't know. And there's, a lot of these games live off of sort of, insider secrets and finding things out. So they need their sort of wikis to do things. But the important part, I think, in all these cases is the designers need to always be aware of sort of the onboarding experience. Like when a new player comes in, what will it be for them? And like if you play like a shitty, God, I shouldn't insult other games. If you play like a browser game, and they like I've done some browser game work, and there's like some browser games that have grown with their audience, and then you come in as a new player, and you just get spammed with like event updates for like things that are you click through like 10 pages of, hey, this has happened, hey, and you know what I mean. So I think even though you have like an audience you grow with, you always have churn. There's always people leaving, and there's always hopefully new people coming in. And I think that's where the interface design needs to be polished. Like if the experts want to go to the wiki to find out what specific thing they have to grind where to do this one specific super hard boss, that's fine. They're already invested. They want to do the work. They want to talk to each other. They want to write the wiki even. They want to be the first one to find out and then write the article. But for the newbies, they need to be able to play the game and find their way into, even though it has grown really complex. So it always needs to sort of maintain this facade of simplicity even.
Right. So then let's say hypothetically you are onboarding into my MMO that has been around for 10 years and it's insanely complex, but we have an incredibly detailed wiki. We have a very thorough forum that's got tons of users posting on it and answering questions and stuff. As interface designer, I've tasked you with, hey, make sure that our new players are having a good time and they're not feeling overwhelmed. What are the things you do? Do you incorporate anything from the wiki and forums into their experience? How do you approach keeping things simple?
So my gut feeling is people, going to a wiki is something you do when you're already invested. Going to a forum and posting on a forum is something you do when you're even more invested. When you're ready to even, deal with other people who can often be sort of annoying, or, if I don't, they don't give me the right answers, whatever. People can be strange. So the thing is, you need to get them invested first. They need to be in the game long enough to care about the wiki, care about learning. So the thing I do is I try and make sure that the first couple hours of the game experience are fun. So I try and sort of use now we're sort of mixing interface design like tutorial design,
right? Yeah.
But it's sort of, I try and use the first hours to sort of steer them towards experiences that are manageable for them. Don't throw them in like a raid.
Right.
Give them some stuff they can achieve and give them a taste of like the core mechanics. Because the core mechanics will probably still be relatively manageable and simple, and just all the stuff on top has become, laboriously complex. But I sort of try and give them the simplest version of that I can.
Right. So I appreciate this solution. I've also been frustrated with it as a new player because very seldom do I start up a new MMO by myself, right? 9 times out of 10, my friend who's level 40 is like, hey, this game's actually awesome. Let's play. And now I've got to go through, the whole onboarding process and a 2-hour tutorial before I can even start to begin to interact with them. And we're way outside of interface design here, but it's a tightrope to walk, I think. And I'm curious then, why do you think so many complex games fail at this onboarding experience? If it seems relatively easy, but why is it so hard for so many games to develop a really strong first impression and make it not bombarding?
I don't think it's that easy, because it's sort of, you don't want to dumb it down too much. Like,
Right.
if the people come in and it's super simple and they think the game's too easy. It's sort of striking the right balance, and then don't make it too long, don't make it too explainy. Making a good tutorial is fucking hard.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a given. You got to condense the
But I
entirety
mean,
of the game.
but it's the same thing, just on like a larger scale. And then, especially like evolving games, you would have to redo it every 3 months or something. Have somebody go over it and tweak things, and we have changed this mechanic. Armor doesn't work like that anymore. We have to make sure people, you know what I mean?
Right.
It breaks all the time.
Right. That's why I think the onboarding process for tabletop games is wonderfully unique, in that you literally will always have a human being right next to you being like, no, we don't roll that die, we roll this die.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's anything about that experience that games could start adopting more?
I mean, as you said, like, a lot of MMO experiences is somebody's bringing you into the game, and they're like, hey, I've played this, it's awesome, come play with me. And I think it's tricky. Like, how do you make that a game mechanic without making it abusable at the same time? Like,
In what sense?
In the sense that if you get rewards because you bring new players into the game,
right?
The game recognizes.
As the CEO of the game company, yes, I give them all the rewards they can for bringing new people. Let's get as many new people in as we can.
Yeah, but then they'll just make fake email accounts, and you know what I mean. If the reward's worth it, they'll just.
Right.
It's if you like. I think what would be a fun solution, but it's tricky to do, is like, if you're new to an MMO, there's a mentor for you. Some player who maybe has volunteered to mentor new players will be assigned to you, maybe because they're online right now, whatever. That's same time zone, whatever. You'll use some matchmaking thing, magic. And then they, help you into the game. And I think there's a lot of potential in using people to help people, because it's a good way to learn. It's a fun way to learn. It also, from like a sort of engagement kind of perspective, it means you already have somebody in the game, which is sort of makes it much more likely that you'll stay. Mm-hmm. But it's tricky. Like, if the MMO is built in a certain way, then you have this person that you can talk to, but you can't do anything with them until you've leveled up to whatever level is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's like, and then I'm off grinding by myself for 3 days before I can even start. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I've got now that it's been voiced. I think there's ideas circling in my head, none of which will ever be used because I don't work on MMOs. But
neither do I.
Yeah, it's good to think about though, and I'd like to see the future of it change, because I agree there is a lot of potential for players helping players and onboarding players, rather than the cold and static a sort of game teaching you human interaction. But then again, I mean, we've seen human interaction go completely wrong in the other direction with game community, so it's a bit of a toss-up. Going forward, what you said you might be working on another X project. What is cooking right now for you? You don't have to no spoilers necessary, but we are curious.
I don't know if I can spoil that project, because it's not only me, so I'm gonna keep the title on that.
That's fine.
I've got that, but it's sort of like been paused a bit because Konstantinos is kind of busy. I've got a tabletop RPG which is ready and which I am starting to do the marketing for, which is a new thing for me, marketing my RPGs. So far, I've just
Right.
sort of released them and then tweeted about them, and then I had enough luck that it sort of worked out. But I kind of want to do like, which is also new space to me. I don't know any streamers or press people, and sort of figure out how I let people know that it's coming. It's called The Mending Circle, and it's a wholesome RPG about healing and witches.
Okay.
I've got another sort of bigger fantasy science fiction-ish RPG I've been working on, which is titled Halo Bright, but it's sort of very early. I've got a playtest campaign, but I'm still sort of fiddling with a lot of things. Um, and then I'm thinking of maybe starting on video games again next year.
So is there anything what dove you into tabletop so hard, and then like what's making you stick around with it?
Um, it was it was happenstance in a way. So I mid 2019 I sort of released No More Profit. The game's released, and there's like a month of hard work of just fixing bugs and talking to people and doing updates. The month is sort of over, and I'm just burnt out. I'm just like, I've made this game. It took me 5 years. Now I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! I don't know what I want to do. I don't know if I want to do games again. I'm sort of in a solid deep pit that I ground myself into, feeling burnt out and sort of a lack of purpose and all these kinds of things. And then I sort of started sort of I accepted that I don't know what I want to do and started doing things. There's like a book that's called The Artist's Way, which is kind of like a self-help book, and it's kind of spiritual, but it's a book about being creative and finding your own creative practice in a way. It's like a 10-week program, and it's a strange book at times, but I found it really useful. And one of the exercises that the author, I forgot her name, recommends is morning pages, which is you get up and you write 3 pages of text. Doesn't matter what, you just write. And I was doing that and other things the book suggests. And eventually, sort of, a lot of the projects I've been doing in the last year sort of appeared on the page. The first couple of months I was writing about my crisis and like how I'm feeling bad and don't know what I want to do and everything's terrible and whatever. The shit just spills out of you. And eventually, sort of that, I've worked through that, and then I don't know, project ideas appeared there, like magic,
Right.
and then I made them.
Right. I've run out of emotive dialogue. What? Oh, I guess game design just falls out. It's that's no, that's a really good exercise. I often think I should be doing more of these sorts of things to
Yeah.
keep myself.
I can only recommend it. I have like a stack this high of like notebooks that are just filled with junk. I'm not doing it daily anymore, but whenever I sort of feel like I lose focus in the sense of I don't know, I'm just dabbling around. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where this project is going. I sit down and write. I just write everything I have about the project or whatever, and then somewhere in there is a way forward. Not always a solution or like a
Right.
eureka, but it's a way of talking to yourself with what it is. It's a
Right.
version of rubber ducking.
Right. Yeah.
You're externalizing the problem by talking about it, writing it down, and processing it in another way. And just the the sort of non-judgmental act of writing a lot allows you to sort of not think about your solutions, but go like, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. Just instead of just producing them and going through the bad ones until you find the good ones.
Right. At least it provides a clarity of intent
Yeah.
with what you're going for. That's really cool. Is there anything that else other than writing every day that you would like to recommend people check out or try? Games you're hyped about, games that you want people to go buy?
All my games, obviously.
Yes.
Um, I don't know. I haven't really been playing too much lately. I gotta say, I've been making my own sort of little RPGs, and then
Well, I
that's been
know.
kind of it. I've been sort of out of the video game loop for a bit.
Where shall people keep up with you if they want to follow further developments
Um,
and such?
Probably my Twitter.
All right.
That's probably the best place.
It's good. It's on screen right now, so should be no problem.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I guess, I mean, is there anything else that you want to say to the people before we slowly bounce out of here?
Keep making games, I guess,
Keep.
and also take care of yourself. Oh yeah, that's it. So I made the game. It took me 5 fucking years, and then the game was done. And the one big lesson I learned is, luckily, Nowhere Profit was financially successful, whatever that means. But this is something you can't control. So my approach to being creative and making games is I'm trying to make a game I'm proud of. Like, I should have thought about this earlier. So the important part is the process, not the result.
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing you can control. You cannot control if the game will be financially successful, if people will love it, if critics will love it. This is something that you can influence because you're making the game, but to a certain degree, it's out of your head. What you can control is the process. So the making of the game should, in itself, provide something to you. It should be a learning experience. It should be fun. It should be, I don't know, challenging in the right way. It should be, giving you something to then show your skills off. Say like, hey, I made this game and I can tell you I can do procedural generation because I made a procedural generation game,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But get something out of the process so you don't grind yourself to dust.
Yeah, no,
And then even if it fails, you still have something.
yeah, I agree with that very wholeheartedly. It was something that took me way too long to learn, especially with my first game, where I was very, very focused on making a game and not very focused on like building my life alongside it.
Yeah.
And you end up in this weird spot where it's like, okay, I've made this game. Now what do I do? And it can be a little bit disorienting, I guess is the best word I can use to describe it.
Yeah.
But if you focus on building life alongside your projects, then at least you feel like you've evolved as a human being, even if your game doesn't do everything you want it to.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah. So to sum it up, make games, but take care of yourself.
Make games and take care of yourself. That's good. All right. Well, with that solid foundation to go forward on, I think we will say adieu, goodbye to everybody. I don't know where you're going after this, audience, but I will see you sometime soon, I'm sure. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.